Hello, my name is Thomas, and in this video I'm talking about my favourite George Lazenby James Bond film, and what an easy choice it was to make. It is of course the only James Bond film starring George Lazenby, although I must say, right at the start, I really feel this is actually Diana Rigg's movie. I think she is such a star and really conveys the character of Teresa from the Ian Fleming novel, which is a novel I really enjoy. The novel really has a theme of change going throughout it. James Bond reflects on even the French currency changing from the old francs to the new. He reflects on his childhood, going to the beach, getting the Cadbury's flake and the lemonade. He reflects on Vesper. He visits Vesper's grave every year, according to the book. And at Piz Gloria, he notes how the skis have changed from those that he was used to. Fleming writes authoritatively on this because, of course, Fleming had some education in Switzerland and was notable for his skiing, for his climbing. This feels like a very personal book, and some of those aspects are, well, they're softened for the movie. So, for example, Marc-Ange, who is, of course, the leader of the Corsican kind of mafia, he is softened for the film. He seems quite genteel, but in the book we get a much harsher side to him, a bit like Karen Bay in From Russia with Love, whilst of course Teresa herself, it's referred to that she had a heartbreak, but in the book it actually expands on that. We learn that her heartbreak was actually the death of her infant child from spinal meningitis. That kind of thing maybe seemed too harsh for the Bond films of the era, but I think the loss of the infant is actually a really important part of the character, which Diana Rigg is able really to convey, even though it's never really spoken. We see her as a strong character, but quite damaged. We see her in really the stages of depression. She, of course, wants to walk into the sea and die at the beginning, and yet we see that height, that joy, as she kind of joyrides through the motor chase, which is quite different in the book to the film. But she really conveys those extremes of emotions. I feel Fleming writes very well on this, the highly strung affairs. And again, although the film is wonderful, it doesn't quite go in that direction. It goes in a much lighter, brighter direction where it can. So for example, in the Piz Gloria sections, it feels more like the movie Alfie, starring Michael Caine, which of course is about the emptiness and the hollowness of swinging 60s London. But I feel the Piz Gloria section is more towards that than the book, which is of course very much around the paranoia and then the terror of being there surrounded by all these mobsters. So for example, one of the mobsters interferes with one of the girls, and then the mob justice is to throw him down the bobsleigh chute, and Bond hears that in the night, hears the scream and the terror, and can only imagine what's happened. It later gets filled in. So we see that kind of mob justice that we don't see in the film. The film at this point is getting very light and very silly, with Ruby from Morecambe Bay in Lancashire, lovely part of the country by the way. But as I say, these things are being left out, but one of the most central things for me that gets left out of the film is, why are we talking about the College of Arms? Like, what's the point? And again, Fleming writes very well on English and perhaps European society looking at snobbery, and it's all about snobbery. Even James Bond is affected. When he pretends to be Sir Hilary Bray, he's thinking on the journey that maybe he'll kind of put on a silly voice, maybe he'll put on airs and graces himself, but realises this is reverse snobbery. You know, the real Sir Hilary Bray is sequestering himself away in Scotland, in his estate there. He's hiking barefoot through Scotland in December, which of course gives you a wonderful feel for the land and can feel great, but it's a very different character from what we see in the movie. And again, Bond does put on a voice. Lazenby is dubbed by another actor for this section. And again, Bond is using this idea of snobbery. He gets Irma Bunt's name, parentage, all kinds of information from her, because he's using her snobbery with the promise of, oh, maybe there is something there. Again, in the film, this isn't really dealt with. It becomes a rather silly and flat joke. But he's using this. So even Ruby Windsor, she thinks, oh, that's the name of the royal family, maybe I'm related. Which of course the royal family got the name Windsor in the First World War when they just changed it from Saxe Coburg Gotha. They named themselves after one of their castles to avoid that Germanic name at that time. So she's unaware of this, and as the book reader, it's a fun little section. But they cut that out, and again, once Bond has left Piz Gloria in the book, he does say to the real Sir Hilary Bray, "Oh, it'd be wonderful if you could give Ruby, her actual ancestry. I think it would mean so much to her." He does pay it back in some way. So I think that's something that could have been included in the film, but it is a wonderful film, and I'm listing the differences between the book, which I really, really enjoy, and the film. But I do enjoy it. I think it's got some of the best music in Bond. Actually, probably my favourite opening titles. I note that I really enjoy From Russia with Love, and their titles where there's no voice. It is purely orchestral, and this is another one which is a simply orchestral sound. Actually, I really enjoy it. I think John Barry is at his best in this film. So there's lots to enjoy. The photography is amazing, so I can understand why lots of filmmakers see this as a technically brilliant film. I think one of the problems with the Bond franchise is that actually, anytime they've done skiing, it's never been as good as on Her Majesty's Secret Service. I think it's done incredibly well. But again, this is very much the Diana Rigg movie. For me, those are the sections I enjoy when she's in it. Powerful performance, and we have George Lazenby as a very young Bond who almost seems out of his league against her performance. Of course, this role had been offered to Timothy Dalton, who was then the rising star of the RFC, and he felt that he was too young. He loved the books and just said, "Look, I'm too young to play the book character that I love." I'm really glad he got his chance later on, but I think it would have been interesting to see him in this film because I think his style and Riggs would have really meshed. Of course, I do also wonder if Roger Moore could have played this, and of course, some people would say, but Roger Moore did all those really silly films, and of course, in his late 40s and early 50s, he played a different character, but if you compare it to how he played the Saint, Series 6 was broadcast before this film was released, and if you just go straight to Series 6, it's almost like a Lost Bond adventure, and I think he could have played it really, really well. Of course, Sean Connery would have been many people's choice for this. By this point, he had fallen very out of love with the series, and I don't think would have come at it with quite the same attitude of the new fellas. But again, that gets into the book cycle as well, because the book cycle is fantastic. We have, say, Thunderball, where Bond becomes a great hero. We have On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where he sees great vulnerability. We see You Only Live Twice, where we see a heartbroken Bond. And then The Man with the Golden Gun, we see some kind of resurrection. I think it's a fantastic story and one they've never quite conveyed. But again, this film is trying to be serious. It's trying to convey a really soulful story, and one that obviously meant a lot to Fleming. But in the movies, it's really sandwiched between the one with the hollowed out volcano and the one where Blofeld cross-dresses and we have Plenty O'Toole and all the craziness in Las Vegas. So it sits in a funny place in the movie franchise by itself. It is a lovely film. But if only we could have the real heights that the book reaches. What a shame. Anyway, if anyone could have their one shot at being Bond, and who could resent that? If anyone could have a one shot, I think this would be a great film to have as your one film. And Lazenby, he gives it his best. He's not Sean Connery, but Sean Connery at that point was the world's highest grossing movie star. Nobody in the world was Sean Connery. So if anybody else, fine. But as I say, this is really Diana Rigg's film, and she conveys so much from the book, even though so much of it is not stated. I hope you enjoy it. I do enjoy it, I really do. But I do tend towards the book a bit more.